Rachel,
And I'm Amanda.
and this is episode 35 of Books and Bingos. This week we're discussing books from Texas's 2024 Tayshas list with returning guest host Shannon Whiteley. So, Shannon, welcome back. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this list?
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be back with y'all today. So this list is for the state of Texas, but we know that it's used all over the country. We know that people like it's posted on many websites. It is specifically for young adult books. It can be fiction, nonfiction, and graphic novels. And it is, there's a group of 9 librarians in the state of Texas that are on the reading committee. And throughout the year, we read and nominate the books that we think are the best of the best. And then in November every year, we have a vote. And so my first year on the committee, I think we read 147 books and ended up with about 90 on the list. So we do try to read a wide range and just we're always focused on what's best for the students, what's best for the teenagers, what is going to hit their interest level, but also is it well written? Is it a topic that is modern and engaging? And so it's really a lot of fun. It's a commitment, but it's a lot of fun to be on the list.
Yeah, sounds like a huge commitment, but I like how you guys have your awards. In Ohio, they call it the Buckeye Book Award, and it's very much student driven. The students nominate the books, and then the students select like their favorites from that list, and then the favorite one. I mean, it's all student driven. So I struggle with getting the kids to participate because a lot of times they don't know new books to add. On our regulations, it has to be published like this year or the previous year, and just trying to pull those books constantly and remind the kids to vote for them. And it's just sometimes it seems like it's not going well having the students nominate things, but in a way it kind of is because it just reminds me, like, even if this book I think is awful, like this is what the kids are liking. This is what they're wanting to read. It gives me a little bit more insight into what they're enjoying to read versus what we as adults think is good literature for them. So I mean there's plus and minus on both sides, but I like the way this is run too. It is nice to have lists from all the different states too to kind of compare and see what books come out where.
I will say there is also a component where the public can nominate books or they can recommend books for us to nominate. And so that could be a student or a teacher or another librarian, but on our Texas Library Association website, there's a form that they can fill out. If a student reads a book and they think, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, then they do have that. I'm glad you said that because they do have that capability of going and filling out the form. One of the 9 of us on the committee has to officially read and nominate it for it to be part of the official consideration, but there is that public write-in suggestion box kind of thing. So that's always really cool too, because that gives us some contact with our readership as well as those of us who are in the profession.
And
Are there
Shannon,
any qualifications to the books that could be nominated? I know you said it's a young adult book.
Yes, young adult. And like you said, it has to have been published in the last 2 years. So this year, it's kind of weird because keeping track of all of it, we're about to vote on the 2025 list that will be published in 2025 in January. But the books on the 2025 list will have been published in 24 and 23.
Okay, yeah,
What does that make sense?
yeah.
It's wild. Sometimes I lose track in the middle of it. I'm
Yes,
like, wait, which lists are okay? So
yes.
a 25 list will be published in January so that it can be, used all year, but it actually will be comprised of books that were published in the last year and a half. It's kind of like
Yeah.
late 2023 up until the end of October 2024.
Yeah.
and
Well, I
I
think
pick a lot from my middle school too from the list. Like, we have YA in middle schools and, so it's nice to have the Lone Star as an option that is strictly middle school. And then we have Tayshas, which tends to lean a little bit more high school, but definitely a great resource.
yeah. And it's really nice to see which books are common across the state because I feel like most people do like that year and a half, 2 year span. So it's always really interesting to see which ones are popping up like everywhere.
And
Absolutely. We have cross lists all the time.
we do. Yeah, I was
Um,
going to say we
and
have Mavericks is our Texas graphic novel award list, and almost without fail, in my experience, if a graphic novel has shown up on the Tayshas list, it's also been on the
Yeah.
Maverick list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Double proof that it's amazing.
I don't think I've ever seen ours is split up. We have four groups. It's split up by like grade level. So it's like K to 3, uh, 5 to or 4 to 7, things like that. I don't even remember the
Yeah.
age range now, but it like split up to like middle school, high school, upper elementary, lower elementary. I don't think any books have ever doubled in a category, at least not that I've seen. I do love that in more recent years, we're seeing like graphic novels show up more, and we're seeing picture books show up in the upper elementary. There was one that like my kids were obsessed with. I'm pretty sure my school single-handedly put that book on the award committee for the state, and it was Elbow Grease by John Cena. They loved that book. It was so funny, but yeah, it's nice to see them show up in older grades and not just the youngest grade band. All right, ladies, let's jump into some of our picks. So today we all picked a book from the 2024 list, correct?
Hey,
Yes.
yes, correct.
Yes. Awesome. All right, Amanda, start us off.
All right, so I picked Queen Bee by Amalie Howard. Shannon's excited that I picked it. I will say she probably would be excited about every book that we picked since she helped put them on the list, so that's awesome.
For sure.
I absolutely loved it. And it's funny because I just finished a middle grade book by Amalie Howard, and she also writes adults. So, like, Homegirl can do all ages, and that's super impressive to me. This is a YA anti-historical Regency era story that will remind you of Bridgerton if you're an adult who has seen that show. And it's also part like the Count of Monte Cristo, which is amazing. And Rachel loves that as well. So, Lady Ella Dalby was humiliated and cast out of society by her best friend Poppy, typical mean girl, when she found out that Ella had been talking with the son of a duke, right? So Poppy wanted this boy and was mad that Ella was getting some attention from him. So she sets out to ruin Ella's life, which she did successfully. Now Ella spends her time in the countryside while Poppy attends balls in the ton. When Ella turns 18, she decides to get revenge by disguising herself as this mysterious heiress, hoping to ruin Poppy's life. But when she encounters the Duke's son again, those plans just don't seem as important as they did before. This is the first in the Diamond series. I'm so excited. It's going to have a sequel that comes out. I have the arc, I just haven't read it yet. And it was filled with a lot of calculated moves by Ella, but also discussions around why revenge isn't the best course of action, which is great for our teens because this is definitely something I think they can relate to. We all talk about what we would do to get back at someone that wronged us. I loved the Bridgerton style of this novel because it has so much diversity included in it. And I love that it comes from Joy Revolution Books. It is the imprint that is run by Nicola Yoon and her husband David. And they publish only BIPOC stories that are filled with joy, which I absolutely love. And I want more books like this in my school library. And the sequel releases in April 2025. It's called Lady Night. The content warnings are going to be bullying, toxic friendship, classism, grief, drug abuse, death of a parent, sexism, body shaming, abandonment, gaslighting. The bingo squares that it would work for is young adult, romance, and Tayshas.
Yay. I like that you called it an anti-history. Is that a thing now?
Yes, that is a new genre that is ever since I guess Bridgerton came out and Hamilton and things like that, where they're putting, a change in our history to I think be better than our actual
Yeah,
history. So yeah,
Okay.
I'm definitely a fan.
I like it.
I like that. That's really cool. I hadn't heard that term either.
Yeah. It's a good name for it. I guess I always just call it like diverse, like retelling.
Reimagining of the
Yeah,
History
yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
reimagined.
yeah. But I like that anti-historical.
Historical. Yeah.
Sounds very like revolutionary.
Because
Yeah.
I'll take genres everywhere, romanticides and
Yes,
Yeah.
all the new genre names.
anti-historical. Nobody's in a box anymore. Everybody's branching.
Yes. All right, Shannon, tell us about your first pick.
Okay, so my first book I'm going to tell you about is Chaos Theory by the amazing Nick Stone. And this is a realistic fiction romance book. and it has two main characters and is told in alternate points of view. Shelby is starting over her senior year at a new school because she is bipolar and let some friends get a little close to her in her old school, and then there was a betrayal that happened, and so she just pulled herself away. Now she's at a new school, she's a senior, she's not interested at all in developing friendships or connections because she's only going to be there for a minute. So she's there, but she's kind of standoffish. And then the other character is Andy, also known as Walter, and you will figure out why he has two names as you read the book. But Andy's kind of big man on campus. But he has struggles because he's recently gone through a pretty terrible breakup. And also, he's a closet alcoholic. And so the story starts when Shelby and Andy's stories actually kind of collide in an unexpected way. And they don't really seem like they would be people who would hang out with one another and be friends, but they realize pretty early on that they're able to kind of share their brokenness with each other and that they aren't horrified by that. So they actually create a friendship pact where they line out these rules, and they're going to always be open and honest. They're going to always be accepting of one another. Of course, they're never going to fall in love because that would be ridiculous. Why would we ever do that? But they're going to rely on each other because they realize they're both broken. This is a book that I read the first time, and I will say the first time in 4 hours because I could not put it down. Like, I came home that night, I told my husband, I was like, I don't know what we're having for dinner, but I'm gonna read a book. I have had the blessing of being able to actually talk with Nick Stone about this book 2 different times. Well, I heard her speak at NCTE as the keynote right before the book came out, and then I was able to host an author panel at Texas Library Association's yearly conference. And the topic that I had was actually teen mental health. So all of the books that I read and the authors that I got to speak to were authors who had written books with teenagers who were struggling with mental health. And without fail, they all said that they wrote those books because they struggled with mental health. And they wrote the book that they wished they had had when they were a teenager because it would have been really great to see somebody in a book that they felt like understood them. Nick was very transparent that this was her most personal book. It's actually the first book she ever tried to write, but she didn't publish it until last year because she wasn't ready. And so, she was like, it's kind of like I opened a vein and I bled on the page. And so it's a gripping, oh my gosh, I can't say enough good things about this book. It's by far been my favorite that I've read in the last couple of years, just because both Shelby and Andy are so flawed, but also so real and genuine, and you just love them and you are constantly rooting for them the whole time.
I had a feeling you were going to pick this one, honestly, because I know how much that panel meant to you at the time and how like everybody was like crying when it was
It was
over.
it was an unreal, like this whole, I didn't know, I got assigned this topic of teen mental health, and I was so excited because I saw who the authors were. Amber McBride was on there, Lizzie Mason, Nora Shawley Carpenter, and like they're just larger than life authors. And I was excited, but then I also got like so nervous because it's such a personal topic. And I honestly decided that day, I brought a box of tissues in my bag and I just pulled them out and I stuck them on the podium and I said, guys, we're just going to be real for the next 55 minutes. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know where it was going to go, but it really was kind of therapy session and it was so great. And when and I had taken notes when I heard Nick Stone at NCTE, not knowing that I would actually end up being able to talk to her about this book later. And so one of the questions I asked her, I said, now, Nick, you said that this was your most personal book that you've ever written and that it was really difficult for you to let go of it and put it out in the public. And she just stopped. She looked at me and she's like, well, girl, you just went there, didn't you? And I said, well, you said it. I'm just asking you to clarify or to tell us more about it. So she's like, well, yeah, I said it, but you weren't supposed to pay attention.
You're supposed to write it down, bring it up
Yeah,
later.
exactly. It was so fun. But
Oh, I love it.
Trigger warnings for this one would obviously be mental health and alcoholism. And then there's also family dynamics that are going on. There's divorce and there's affairs, extramarital affairs, um, things like that. So there's definitely things to watch out for. I'm not sure what bingo squares, Tayshas for sure.
Yes.
Um,
And young adult and
and young
romance.
adult. I know y'all hit that later. So
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
All right, I picked up a graphic novel. I'd been kind of looking at this one before I saw it on the list, and when it was on the list, I'm like, I'm definitely going to do this one. I just finished it yesterday. It's Mija, My Bilingual Summer in Mexico by Christine Suggs. I think it's a YA graphic memoir. We follow the author as a high school student on her first solo trip to Mexico to visit her family. It's a very relatable kind of slice of lifestyle book. Our author's really struggling with all the intersections of her circles of identification, like nationality, racially, lingually, sexually, gender identity wise, just all of them. Like, where is her like intersection of the Venn diagram? And no matter what your own circles are, I feel like that's why this was so relatable. Everybody has those circles and they're trying to find their intersection. So I think just the overall message of like, there is a place for you, no matter what your circles are. I really liked that a lot. I really loved the bilingual aspect of it. Of course, that's going to be coming. That's in the subtitle. And I felt super proud of myself that I was able to understand the majority of the conversations. I am definitely not fluent in Spanish, but I've been trying to learn a little bit. So I was super excited about that. And I really enjoyed the experience because I do work with some English language learning students, and it felt like a realistic experience that they would have trying to read books in another language as well. So, I mean, I found myself getting frustrated sometimes because I didn't know a word, so the sentence didn't make sense, and just trying to, figure it out from the context clues. So I really like the experience itself as well, just to get a little bit of insight in there. Content warnings would be fat phobia, colonization, immigration, and illegal immigration status. Squares would be young adult, the Tayshas, and Hispanic representation. And I would say nonfiction because this was a graphic memoir.
And we were talking about crossover, and that one was Mavericks when I was on Mavericks, and it also ended up on Tasha. So that's kind of like what we're talking about with like finding two, like, a really good graphic novel that happens to be young adult. We're gonna see some doubling up on lists, but I felt like that one definitely needed to be on all the lists. I love that book.
That was really good.
Okay, so gonna do a little shift. The last one was all like romancy. This one was probably the best nonfiction that I read in 2023, I think is when I read it. It's called Accountable, the true story of a racist social media account and the teenagers whose lives it changed by Dashka Slater. This is, and I think I put it like in all caps when I did my review, the most important young adult fiction you'll read, especially like the year that it came out. Dashka has such like a great way of taking these serious topics that teens are going through or that are happening right now in our world and making them easily to like able to read. And I think Rachel and I have talked about this on other episodes about how we don't like dry nonfiction. We like to have it feel like a story or feel like it's really happening. And that's exactly what she does. So this follows a high school student who starts a private racist and sexist Instagram account to be funny. But when it goes viral, he tries to take it back, but it's too late. Now the residents of Albany, California are affected in some way by this account and the horrible images of students at the local high school. Adults try to get involved both in good conscience and in bad. Lawsuits, repercussions, consequences all occur for months afterwards. Who should be held accountable for these kids' actions? And it's honestly stuff that we are going through in our society as social media continues to grow and transform and change, without much training for any of us to teach it to kids. That's something that I'm also very passionate about in my line of work and what we do in school libraries is to try to educate our kids on digital citizenship as well as we can. But these things are still happening. Like literally, and throw AI in it, and now we have even more issues happening. I know of a school in the Northeast where a teacher they took his like images of him and made them very racist and made a Facebook account of him saying these horrible things about students, about, people of color. And he didn't do any of that. But with the help of AI, he was able to kind of have this happen and set off a big chain of reactions. So things like that are happening in our world. And I picked this one up because I loved 57 Bus. If you haven't read that one by Dashka, like it's amazing. And so then I saw that this book won the YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Award, which is like the best you can do for young adult nonfiction. Um, and it deserves all the awards and more. I was so glad to see that Tayshas ended up putting it on the list. I feel like Slater does such a great job with researching these books before she starts writing them. You can see testimonies, firsthand accounts, all the research, and then she includes all the resources as well. Um, I got to talk to Dashka this summer at ALA, and just told her how much this book like meant to me, and I feel it should be required reading for every teen and potentially tween in this country, because of how timely it is and how they don't always see how their actions are going to be affecting long term when they put stuff on the internet. So content warnings are racism, racial slurs, hate speech, suicidal thoughts, suicide recounted, cyberbullying, microaggressions, bullying, anti-Semitism, and misogyny. The bingo squares this would work for is nonfiction, Tayshas, and young adult.
You would think in some way the kids would be more aware of this than we are, of like what you say online stays online
Right.
because they've had it forever and they've seen it blow up in people's faces. And it's just sometimes it surprises me that they're not more aware of it because it has been a thing.
Right.
But maybe it's just because it's always been there. They kind of just take it for granted that, this is just something that's happened forever because they
Right.
can't remember a time without Instagram?
It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
One of the things we really thought was important about that book too is it covers more than one type of user of the Instagram account. Like it not only does it hold accountable, because that's the name of the book, but it holds accountable the creator and the content, the person that posted everything. But it's if you liked it, if you even followed it and never even liked one of the posts, but you followed it, knowing what kind of account it was, because it's this private account, right? That is so safe because nobody's ever going to catch, but y'all know that teenagers screenshot everything. And once it's screenshot and reposted, then like it's forever. It's not going to go away. And but there was also a great discussion in this book about where's the line of responsibility? Like who is culpable in a situation like this? Is it just the one who creates it? Is it the one that perpetuates it? Is it the person that taught the creator that that's okay? Like it's a deep book, but
Oh yeah.
it was
So
so
many
good.
great conversations.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, and ones that I mean, and you're right, like how I feel like yes, they know so much about the social media world, but at the same time, their brains aren't developed
Right.
yet.
Yes.
So it's like giving, a kid a keys to a car and saying,
Yeah.
"Go for it, and let's see what happens." Like it's
Yeah.
terrifying. And I know some, and it also like the parents are like, let's say they're millennials age, right? That have tweens and budding teens now. It's like we didn't have this. So they don't know always how to parent it. Then a lot of times they just give it to them and say, go for it. And it's just kind of scary. And I wish we had more of as a nation, training for it, like how to parent with it and just like different ways to kind of prevent some of these things. Cause I think a lot of them are preventable.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
agree.
All right, Shannon, what's your last one? I can't wait.
My last one. So, one other thing about Tayshas is we have the list, but then every year there's a top 10. So like we have our whole list of 80 to 90 titles, but then there's always the top 10. So both of the books that I selected and Accountable were all in the top 10 as well. But the last one that I picked is called The Queue. And this is yet again another kind of genre. This is science fiction slash dystopian. It's written by Amy Tintera, who is a Texan, and that's kind of important because the queue itself, before I explain the characters, I need to tell you what the queue is. It's actually a quarantine zone, and because this is dystopian, it is set in the future. So the quarantine zone is what used to be known as the state of Texas, specifically the Austin, like Hill Country area where Tintera actually is from. So there was a virus that swept the nation of the United States back in the day, and anybody who then became a carrier of the virus was sent into the queue. And so the queue is walled off. You can't get to it. There's one gate in and out of the United States. The United States still supports the queue in that they give them supplies and food, but it's no longer a part of the nation. So if you're put into the queue, then you are no longer a citizen in the United States. So that's kind of interesting. So that's the background. That's what's going on in the world. And then our two main characters, one, the boy, his name is Lennon, and he is a 17-year-old son of a U.S. senator who is running for president. And he is actually kidnapped. And right before the election, like a week and a half before the election takes place, Lennon, who has been a bit of a troublemaker, so I think initially when it's found out that he's missing, people are like, oh, he's just gone off the grid again. But actually Lennon has been dropped into the queue, and he like has parachute on and is literally dropped into the queue and doesn't really know what's going on. And immediately he stands up and realizes there are people running at him, and it is like the thugs that live around the border of the queue that are like this out of control kind of gang, may or may not be cannibals. And like he is immediately in trouble. And out of nowhere comes this girl that all of a sudden starts fighting people off. And he gets rescued, for quote unquote, for lack of a better term, by this girl, and she drags him to the headquarters. Turns out that she is the daughter of the primary enforcer in the queue. So Lennon, as a United States citizen, has always been curious about the queue because they know it exists and they know that there's people in there and they're probably living their life and they have a society, but because they're completely cut off, they don't know exactly like how is life structured, how are they doing. And so all of a sudden he gets this up close look. And so now you have Maisie, whose dad, like I said, is the enforcer. So they've kind of created their own pseudo government. They have medical teams, they have hospitals, because of course they're all in there because they're a carrier of this virus. So Maisie rescues Lennon and takes him to her dad. And once Lennon explains who he is and they actually believe him, because for a minute, like, we're like, who are you and why are you here? But they finally believe him. So they tell him they have developed this immunization that is a temporary immunization that gives you 4 days of immunity from the virus. And so they inoculate Lennon, and now Maisie is volunteering to be the leader of the group that's going to try to get Lennon out to the gate. There's one gate, one entrance in the United States. And so they have 4 days to take him across the queue, which is, probably a 60-mile radius, but you find out that there's factions and there's gangs and there's territories, and like he's going to have to stay under the radar to get to the gate safely because it's of course on the other side of the enemy territory. And Maisie has to be like this crazy talented fighter and schemer and all of this to lead the gang. And so it's kind of a wild ride, but it was engaging. It was a fun read. It never felt bogged down. I think it was almost 300 pages, but it didn't really feel like it because it was so fast. And Lennon at times is really annoying because he's this spoiled senator's son, but then at the other times he's got some depth and complexity that you're like, oh, there's somebody in there, and you do want to root for him. until he makes you mad again. And Maisie's just trying to figure out what in the world is going on outside of these walls. If you're an example of what Americans are, then maybe I'm happy being in the queue anyway. So it's an adventure story for sure, but quite enjoyable. Definitely, it was timely. She wrote it during COVID, which you can definitely see. So anybody who has triggers because of being quarantined, maybe that would definitely be a content warning for this one.
I love this book. I love this book so much. Like, I think Deb read it first.
Hmm.
Like, hey, you need to read this. And I'm all for a dystopian story. And it also is very timely. I think it deals with a lot of like subtext and the border issue that's going on. And then also like obviously, like you said, with COVID, it was just like the perfect time for that book to release. And then this last year, like in 2024, she released an adult thriller, Listen for the Lie. Oh, that was one of my favorite thriller books, and it's like a podcast thriller too. So Rachel, that one's if you haven't read it yet, you better get on that because she's just such a great writer, and I can't wait to see what else she does.
And I loved it as a Texan that she said it in Texas because you could tell when you read it. If you've ever lived in the Austin area, I lived in and around Austin um, back in the 90s, and it felt right. Like she got it right. She got
Right.
the terrain right. She got the history of the area correct. And so as a Texan, that was fun. But you don't have to have been a Texan to understand and to love it as well.
Our fellow Ohioan. How do you, is it Ohioan? I don't even know how to say
Owen?
that.
Ohioan?
Ohioan.
Ohioan?
Yeah.
Everybody jokes you can tell who's from Ohio in the room if you yell OH in the room because everybody
And
from
say
Ohio is
Io.
going to yell back IO.
I didn't know
I
that.
actually knew that, and I'm not sure why I knew that.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Probably from college football and my husband.
Right.
Yes. It's
I'm not gonna
definitely, yeah, for our Columbus, the Ohio State University.
lie.
I didn't go to Ohio State, so I'm not that keen on it, but it's just, it's fun to chant. It's fun to get in on a chant.
Yes.
Well, speaking of Ohio, my last pick is an author from Ohio, Minnie McGinnis, and I read A Long Stretch of Bad Days. This is a YA dark, twisty mystery with that true crime podcast element that is just delicious in a book. We have our two main characters from a small town in Ohio, and they're from complete opposite sides of the track, but they find themselves paired up to try to get a history credit because of a little snafu on their graduate diploma. So they decide to work together on a podcast and cover a historical event from the town called The Long Stretch of Bad Days, which that is just a phenomenal way to enter into a book with this. It's like immediately want to know what happened during all of these bad days. Like I gotta know. And it turns out, in this little small town, they suffered a tornado and flooding and their very first murder all in the same week. So, I mean, that is a long stretch of bad days. But not everyone in the town is happy when the girls start digging into things better left buried. So, I think everyone loves that fictional true crime podcast element. I think it's even more fun when it's fiction because you don't have to feel like any feels. Like these are not real people that you have to be worried about. So, you can just sit back and enjoy it. It very much gives vibes of like Sadie from Courtney Summers, and that was one I really enjoyed. So I was really excited about that. This one I feel like felt like a true crime podcast just reading it because like at the beginning they're giving you just information and background about the community and you don't really know what's going on and it's not the most exciting part, but then the more they tell you the more into it you get and the more excited you get and the faster it goes and then you start piecing together clues and then you literally cannot put it down. So I mean just the timing of it even felt really spot on for this book, and I must say the audiobook was amazing. I also think the town was so relatable. I'm assuming to most rural places that have small towns, but definitely here in Ohio where you see the divide of the haves and the have-nots and how important appearances are, and how that can really have a lot of consequences. So I thought that was just, all of this was amazing. It was entertaining, it was thought-provoking, it was just wonderful. Content warnings for pretty much everything, though. I mean, murder, violence, drug use, gun violence, animal death, abuse, child abuse, sexual violence, murder, all of the things. The bingo squares are going to be young adult, Tayshas, thriller, mystery, and I would say fall vibes. I would put that in that box.
For sure. Mindy is the GOAT when it comes to dark YA books that I think about later. Like it's like Tiffany D. Jackson,
Mhm.
Mindy McGinnis,
Yes.
like it's just like, oh my God, how do you think about this stuff? But I love this one and I'm kicking myself. I didn't read the audiobook because I read the arc of it, but I didn't read the audio and I bet it was phenomenal.
It sounded like podcasts.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. I also did the audiobook. I think I listened at school and in my car, but I did read some of the physical book too, but I preferred the audio because it just felt like you were listening to these girls
Yeah.
figure out this thing. It
Oh
was
my
great.
gosh, and I love Bristol, the one from the quote
Mhm.
unquote wrong side of the tracks.
Right?
Exactly.
Love her. I mean,
Everybody
love
needs a
her.
friend like that.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
real.
All right, and those are our recommendations for the week. A special thanks to Shannon Whiteley for guest hosting this week. Shannon, how can our listeners find more reviews from you online?
For listeners who would like to see more of the Tayshas list, you can find it on the TLA website, and it's Texas Library Association. But you can also just Google Tayshas, Tayshas, and you can do Tayshas 2024, and that'll give you the current list. And then again, we're going to vote again in November, so look for the new list coming out in January.
Awesome. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, reach out on social media at Books and Bingos or email us at booksandbingos@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and join us again next week when we'll be recommending books releasing in December and January. Happy reading! Tayshas.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right.